Emily Carter sat in the dimly lit office, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a suffocating force. Across from her, Ethan Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises, regarded her with an expression as unreadable as the stormy sky outside the window. "This is the contract." His deep voice broke the silence, sliding a sleek black folder toward her. "You marry me, and in return, your family's debts disappear." Emily clenched her hands in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. This was madness. She had spent her entire life building a name for herself, working hard, proving that she wasn't just the daughter of a failed businessman. And yet, here she was, signing away her freedom for money. She glanced at the contract, scanning the terms. 1 year of marriage, no romantic entanglements, absolute discretion, and in return, a check large enough to wipe her family's financial ruin clean. Her mother's desperate voice echoed in her mind. "Emily, please, we have no choice." She exhaled sharply. "Why me?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Because you're perfect for this role. You're smart, independent, and not the type to fall in love easily." Her chest tightened at his words. So that was it. He had chosen her because she was detached, because she could play the role of the dutiful wife without complication. Emily looked at the pen in front of her. A single signature would change her life forever, and so with a deep breath, she picked it up and signed. The wedding took place 2 weeks later. It was extravagant, as expected of a Harrison event. Lavish floral arrangements, a 5-star venue in Manhattan, an A-list guest list. To the world, it was a fairy tale. To Emily, it was a well-rehearsed lie. As she walked down the aisle in her designer gown, her heartbeat pounded in her ears. At the end of the aisle, Ethan stood tall, looking every bit the powerful businessman that he was, composed, distant, unreadable. When she reached him, he offered his arm. She took it, forcing herself to smile as the cameras flashed. The vows were recited, hollow words of devotion spoken for the sake of appearances. Then, "You may kiss the bride." Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he leaned in, pressing a brief, calculated kiss against her lips. There was no warmth, no passion, only a transaction sealed with a kiss. And just like that, Emily Carter became Mrs. Ethan Harrison. The honeymoon phase never came. There were no stolen kisses, no whispered affections. Their marriage was exactly as outlined in the contract, a business arrangement. Ethan was a ghost in their penthouse, rarely home before midnight, always drowning in work. And Emily? She played the role of the perfect wife in public, standing by his side at charity events, smiling for the cameras, but behind closed doors, they were nothing more than strangers. One night, after another event, she finally broke the silence. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "we could at least pretend we like each other at home." Ethan, who was loosening his tie, glanced at her with mild amusement. "Would that make you feel better?" Emily scoffed, setting her glass down. "Never mind." Silence stretched between them. Then, "I don't dislike you," Ethan said casually. Emily blinked. "What?" His lips curled into a smirk. "I said, I don't dislike you. You're competent, you understand the rules, and you don't complain." She stared at him for a long moment. That was probably the closest thing to a compliment she would ever get from him. With a humorless chuckle, she shook her head. "Wow, high praise coming from Mr. Ice King himself." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Ice King?" Emily smirked. "What? You thought people didn't talk? You have a reputation, Mr. Harrison." He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "And yet here you are, married to me." Her smirk faltered. He was right. She was stuck in this marriage, and no amount of sarcasm would change that. Despite their cold dynamic, Emily began to notice small things. Ethan always ensured she had breakfast, even if he wasn't home to eat with her. When she caught the flu, he canceled an important meeting to take care of her, even if he grumbled about it the entire time. And one night, when she fell asleep on the couch, she woke up in bed with no memory of how she got there. Was he always like this? Or was she just starting to see the cracks in his armor? 3 months into their marriage, Emily walked into their penthouse one evening and froze. Sitting on the living room sofa, legs elegantly crossed, sipping wine like she owned the place, was a woman Emily had never seen before. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her emerald dress hugging every curve. She exuded confidence, familiarity, and then she spoke. "You must be the wife." Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. "And you are?" she asked, keeping her voice even. The woman smirked. setting her glass down. Sophia Brooks. The name rang like an alarm in Emily's mind. Sophia Brooks, Ethan's ex, her heart clenched. And in that moment, as she met Sophia's calculating gaze, Emily knew. Her life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Emily stood frozen in place, her fingers instinctively tightening around the strap of her handbag. Sophia Brooks. The name carried a weight she hadn't been prepared for. Sitting in her penthouse, sipping wine like she belonged there, was the ex-girlfriend of Ethan Harrison. Emily forced herself to breathe. "You must be the wife." The words had been said with casual indifference, but the underlying meaning was sharp as a knife. Emily squared her shoulders. "And you must be the uninvited guest." Sophia's lips curled into an amused smirk. "I like you," she mused, swirling the wine in her glass. "You've got a spine? That's cute." Emily didn't react. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of seeing any weakness. She set her purse down and walked toward the kitchen, ignoring Sophia's presence entirely. But Sophia wasn't done. "You know," she continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "Ethan and I used to live here together. This place still feels like home to me." Emily's grip on the refrigerator handle tightened. She hadn't known that, and she was furious that it bothered her. Before she could respond, another voice entered the room. "Sophia." "Ethan." Emily turned to see him standing in the doorway, his gaze fixed on Sophia. But there was no warmth there, no nostalgia, only thinly veiled annoyance. Sophia smiled, completely unbothered. "Darling," she greeted smoothly, "you're home early." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Why are you here?" She pouted, crossing her legs. "What, no hug? No, I missed you?" Emily watched, her expression unreadable. Would Ethan let her stay? Would he show hesitation? But to her surprise, "Get out." Sophia blinked, then let out a laugh of disbelief. "Ethan, don't be so dramatic," she purred, standing up. "I just wanted to say hello." He didn't budge. "You said it. Now leave." Emily didn't move, but inside, a strange sense of satisfaction settled in her chest. Sophia scoffed. "Fine, but we're not done talking." She turned toward Emily, a slow, knowing smirk on her lips. "Enjoy my leftovers, sweetheart." Then she walked out. Emily stood there, heart pounding, as the door clicked shut, a beat of silence. Then, "Are you okay?" Emily turned to Ethan, caught off guard by the question. She had expected indifference, not concern. "I'm fine," she said smoothly. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then finally he nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with thoughts she didn't want to have. Sophia's unexpected visit changed something in Emily. Before, she had been able to convince herself that this marriage was just a contract. But now she was hyper-aware of everything, of the way Ethan came home late, of the way his phone buzzed with messages he never answered in front of her, of the way Sophia had spoken with such confidence, as if she knew something Emily didn't. It bothered her, and that bothered her even more, because this wasn't a real marriage. So why did it feel like she was starting to care? Days passed, but the tension lingered. Emily didn't bring up Sophia. And Ethan? He acted as if nothing had happened. Their interactions became even more distant than before. Until one evening, "You've been quiet," Ethan observed as they sat in their usual silence over dinner. Emily barely glanced up. "Have I?" Ethan set his fork down, his gaze steady. "If you have something to say it." Emily met his gaze. "Fine," she said. "Why was she here?" Ethan exhaled. "I told you, it wasn't my idea." "But she was comfortable enough to walk in like she owned the place," Emily pointed out. Ethan's expression darkened. "I handled it." Emily's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Yes, I saw. Very impressive." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Are you implying something?" She leaned back in her chair. "I'm just wondering if this contract marriage includes me playing second to your past relationships." The words hung between them. Ethan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then, "You're not second to anyone," he said. The quiet intensity in his voice caught Emily off guard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan stood. Dinner was over, but the war between them had only just begun. The next morning, Emily woke up to something unexpected, a gift. Sitting on the kitchen counter was a small, elegant box tied with a silk ribbon. Frowning, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, simple but undeniably beautiful. A note was placed inside. "For the wife I should probably treat better. E." Emily blinked. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected Ethan to acknowledge the tension between them, let alone try to fix it. But now, as she stared at the necklace, one thought stood out in her mind. Maybe this marriage wasn't as simple as she thought. Emily stared at the necklace for far too long. She wasn't naive. She knew a gift from Ethan Harrison wasn't just a gift. There had been no apology attached, no grand speech, just a simple note. For the wife, I should probably treat better. E. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sentimental. But it was something. She picked up the necklace, running her fingers over the smooth silver chain. What did it mean? Was this his way of trying to fix the distance between them? Or was this just another calculated move, a gesture to keep her content, to keep things from falling apart? Emily exhaled. Whatever it wasn't enough, not when Sophia Brooks was still lurking like a shadow from his past. 3 days passed without a word from Sophia. Emily wanted to believe that the woman had finally gotten the message, that Ethan's rejection had been enough. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that easy. And she was right. Because on the 4th day, Sophia showed up again. Emily had just stepped out of a high-end boutique in Manhattan when she heard it. Well, look who it is. The voice was smooth, confident, laced with amusement. Emily turned. Sophia Brooks stood a few feet away, dressed in an elegant white coat, looking effortlessly polished, as if she had walked straight out of a magazine spread. Emily refused to be intimidated. She tilted her head. Are you following me now? Sophia let out a soft laugh. Oh, sweetheart, don't flatter yourself. She stepped closer, her green eyes gleaming with something unreadable. I just happened to be in the area. Emily folded her arms. Lucky me. Sophia's lips curved into a smirk. You know, she mused, I've been thinking about you, about how unfortunate your situation is. Emily raised an eyebrow. My situation? Sophia leaned in slightly. You know, being someone's second choice. Emily's heart clenched, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she let out a soft, unimpressed sigh. If you're looking for a reaction, you're going to be disappointed. Sophia chuckled. Oh, sweetheart, she said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. I don't need a reaction. I just wanted to remind you of something. Emily kept her expression neutral. And what's that? Sophia smiled. That you're only in his life because I left first. Emily's stomach tightened, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she gave Sophia a slow, deliberate smile. And yet, she said, I'm the one wearing his ring now. Sophia's smirk faltered for the briefest second. Then, she laughed, a soft, knowing sound. We'll see how long that lasts, she murmured. And with that, she walked away, leaving Emily standing there, gripping her handbag a little too tightly. That night, as Emily lay in bed, Sophia's words echoed in her mind. You're only in his life because I left first. She hated that it got to her. Because, was it true? Did Ethan ever really move on from her? Emily rolled onto her side, staring at the ceiling. She had never asked about what had happened between Ethan and Sophia, because she didn't care. Did she? Her chest tightened. She needed to know, and there was only one person who could give her an answer. The next morning, Emily found Ethan in his home office, reading through reports. She didn't hesitate. Tell me about Sophia. Ethan froze. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he set his papers down. His gaze met hers. What about her? Emily folded her arms. Why did you two break up? A silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Ethan sighed. It was complicated. Emily raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. Then, she left me. Emily blinked. What? Ethan exhaled. She wanted more. A different life, one I wasn't willing to give her. Emily frowned. What kind of life? Ethan hesitated. Then, finally, one where she was the center of it. Emily stared at him. Sophia had left because Ethan refused to prioritize her. She didn't want to be with someone who put business before everything else, Ethan said, his tone matter of fact. So she walked away. Emily felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, because for the first time, she saw it. Sophia hadn't left because Ethan wasn't enough. She had left because he wouldn't give her everything. And yet, you still let her walk into our home like she belonged there. Ethan's gaze darkened. I didn't let her do anything, he said, and if she told you otherwise, she's lying. Emily exhaled, turning away. She had her answer now. But why didn't it feel like enough? That evening, Emily sat in the penthouse alone. Ethan was at a business dinner, and she? She was trying not to overthink. But it was getting harder. because no matter how much she told herself this was just a contract, no matter how much she reminded herself that none of this should matter, it did. And she didn't know why. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Meet me for a drink. I have something you should hear." Emily hesitated, then she grabbed her coat and walked out the door. Emily hesitated outside the upscale lounge where she was supposed to meet Sophia Brooks. She wasn't sure why she had come. Curiosity? Maybe. Frustration? Definitely. But deep down, she knew it was something more. Something she didn't want to admit. She wanted to know what Sophia had to say, because despite herself, she needed to understand where she stood in Ethan's life. She stepped inside, the dim lighting casting a warm glow over the sleek marble bar. And there, sitting gracefully in a corner booth, was Sophia, a glass of wine in hand, a knowing smile on her lips. Emily exhaled sharply and walked over. "Glad you came," Sophia her glass down. "I wasn't sure if you would." Emily slid into the seat across from her. "Just say whatever it is you think I need to hear." Sophia smirked. "Straight to the point. I like that." Then she leaned forward. "Tell me, Emily," she murmured. "Has Ethan told you everything about us?" Emily's stomach tightened. "I know enough," she said evenly. Sophia tilted her head. "Do you?" Emily clenched her fists beneath the table. "What are you trying to say?" Sophia exhaled, taking a slow sip of her wine before setting the glass down with deliberate grace. "Then, he almost married me." The words hit like a slap. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Sophia smiled. "Did he tell you that part?" she asked softly. Emily didn't move. She had asked Ethan about Sophia, and he had told her that Sophia had left because he wouldn't prioritize her, but he never mentioned marriage. That was something else entirely. "You're lying," Emily said, but even to her own ears, her voice sounded uncertain. Sophia smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I were." Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a velvet ring box. Emily's stomach dropped. She watched, frozen, as Sophia opened it. Inside sat a diamond engagement ring. Elegant, stunning, and painfully familiar. Because Emily had seen that exact ring before, in Ethan's safe, in their home, the ring he had never spoken about. Sophia let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Then, "You're just wearing the ring I left behind." Emily left the lounge in a daze. The city lights blurred around her as she walked, heart hammering in her chest. She hated herself for feeling this way. She shouldn't care. She knew this marriage wasn't real. She knew Ethan wasn't hers. But standing there, looking at that ring, the one he had once planned to give to Sophia, it felt personal. It felt like she had been living in someone else's shadow this entire time. And that was something she couldn't ignore. By the time Emily reached the penthouse, her blood was boiling. She didn't even bother taking off her coat. She stormed into Ethan's office, slamming the door behind her. He was sitting at his desk, casually reviewing documents, but at the sound of the impact, he glanced up. "Emily?" His brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "That's a great question," she snapped. Ethan slowly set his pen down. "Talk to me," he said evenly. Emily threw her phone onto his desk, the screen still lit with a photo she had secretly snapped of Sophia's engagement ring. Ethan's gaze flickered to it, and for the first time, his expression changed, a flash of something dangerously close to guilt. Emily caught it immediately. "She wasn't lying," she whispered. Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "No," he admitted, "she wasn't." Emily felt something inside her crack. "You were going to marry her." Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw. "It was a long time ago, Emily. But you never got rid of the ring," she shot back. Silence. Then, "No, I didn't." Her breath hitched. "Why?" Ethan didn't answer. And that told her everything she needed to know. Emily took a slow, shaky breath. "I was always going to be second place, wasn't I?" she whispered. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers. "That's not true." She let out a bitter laugh. "Really?" she asked. "Because standing here, it sure as hell feels that way." Ethan stood then, his movements sharp, controlled. "I never wanted you to feel like that," he said, his voice low but firm. Emily clenched her fists. "Then why keep it, Ethan?" she demanded. "Why hold on to something from a woman who walked away from you?" He hesitated, and that was what broke her. Emily exhaled sharply, stepping back. "You can keep your ring," she said, voice quieter now. "You can keep your past." Then she turned and walked away. For the first time since their marriage began, Emily slept in a separate room. And Ethan, he didn't stop her. Emily woke up feeling exhausted, her body ached, her mind raced. She didn't know what to do with herself. When she finally left her room, she expected Ethan to be gone, at work, avoiding her, pretending like nothing had happened. But to her surprise, he was there, sitting at the kitchen counter, a coffee cup in hand, looking just as tired as she felt. He glanced up when he saw her. "Morning." Emily didn't respond. She just walked past him, heading for the fridge. But then, "I threw it away." She froze. Slowly, she turned to face him. Ethan held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "The ring," he said. "I threw it away." Emily's throat tightened. She should have felt something. Relief, satisfaction. Instead, she just felt tired. Because it wasn't about the ring anymore. It was about the fact that it had taken all of this for him to let it go. She swallowed. "Good for you," she murmured. Then, without another word, she walked away. That night, Ethan came home late. Emily was still awake, but she didn't wait for him. For the first time, she let herself fall asleep without wondering where he was, and for the first time, she realized she didn't want to be in this marriage anymore. Emily sat in her office, staring blankly at the stack of design sketches on her desk. She hadn't been able to concentrate all morning. Ever since that night, when Ethan admitted to keeping the engagement ring meant for Sophia, something inside her had shifted. She had told herself from the beginning that this marriage wasn't real. She had reminded herself over and over that she wasn't supposed to care. And yet, here she was, sitting in an empty room, feeling like her entire world had come undone. She could still hear his voice from that morning. "I threw it away." He had meant it as a gesture, as if it would fix what was already broken. But the truth, he shouldn't have needed a reason to throw it away in the first place. A knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she said, clearing her throat. The door opened, and to her surprise, it wasn't her assistant. It was Nathan Pierce. Emily blinked. "Nathan?" Nathan Pierce was her best friend, one of the few people who had stood by her side when her life had fallen apart before the marriage. The last time she had seen him, she had been signing away her freedom to Ethan Harrison. He gave her a lopsided grin. "Hey, stranger," she exhaled, feeling some of the weight on her chest lift. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Nathan walked in, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "I was in the area," he said. "Figured I'd check in on my favorite runaway bride." Emily rolled her eyes. That joke stopped being funny 6 months ago. "Yeah, well, you haven't exactly been around to remind me," Nathan shot back. "You disappeared, Em." Emily's shoulders tensed. She knew he wasn't wrong. Ever since she had married Ethan, she had cut herself off from almost everyone. At first, it had been out of necessity. Her new life didn't leave room for the people from her old one. But now? Now she wasn't sure if it had been a choice or a consequence. Nathan's expression softened. "You okay?" he asked. Emily hesitated. Then, before she could stop herself, "No," she admitted. Nathan didn't look surprised. He just leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Tell me everything." And so, she did. They moved to a quiet cafe nearby, away from the suffocating walls of her office. Emily stirred her coffee absent-mindedly as she recounted everything. The contract, the cold distance between her and Ethan, Sophia's return, the engagement ring, and most of all, the growing realization that she didn't want to be in this marriage anymore. Nathan listened, his jaw tightening as she spoke. When she finally finished, he exhaled sharply. "Emily," he said, "you need to leave him." She swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Nathan demanded. "The contract is almost up, right? Just walk away." Emily clenched her fists beneath the table. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked away, because the truth was something she didn't want to say out loud. The truth was, somewhere along the way, she had started to care. Somewhere along the way, this marriage had stopped feeling like just a contract. And that was the real problem. Because how do you walk away from something that was never supposed to feel real, but somehow did? That evening, Emily returned to the penthouse, her mind a tangled mess of questions she didn't have answers for. She wasn't sure what kind of conversation she was expecting with Ethan. But what she didn't expect was to walk in and see Sophia sitting on their couch. Again. Her heart plummeted. Sophia looked up, smiling like she belonged there. "Emily," she greeted smoothly, "you're home late." Emily barely heard her. Her eyes immediately snapped to Ethan, who was standing near the bar looking utterly exhausted. He ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, I can explain." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can explain?" she repeated. "Please, by all means, go ahead." Sophia smirked, standing gracefully. "No need for dramatics, sweetheart," she said. "I just came to talk." Emily turned to her, eyes blazing. "Talk about what?" she demanded. "About how I'm just wearing the ring you left behind? Oh, wait, you already did that." Sophia's smirk widened. "Oh, Ethan," she mused, "she really is feisty. I almost feel bad for her." Emily's blood boiled, and then Ethan finally spoke. "Sophia, get out." Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Ethan stepped forward, his patience visibly running thin. "You heard me," he said, voice dangerously low. "You are no longer welcome in my home. You don't get to do this." Sophia's expression flickered. For the first time, she didn't look amused. "You're really choosing her?" she asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I already did." A silence stretched between them. Then Sophia laughed softly. "Fine," she said, "but don't come crawling back when she leaves you two." And with that, she walked away, for good. The moment the door closed, Emily turned to Ethan. Her hands were shaking. "Ethan." "I didn't invite her," he said quickly. "She just showed up." Emily swallowed hard. "And you let her in?" Ethan exhaled. "I shouldn't have, but it doesn't matter. She's gone now." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "You think that fixes everything?" Ethan's expression hardened. "What do you want me to say, Emily?" She shook her head. "It's not about what I want you to say, Ethan." She whispered. "It's about the fact that I can't do this anymore." Ethan froze. "What?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "I can't stay in this marriage." The words hung between them, heavy, final. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet now, dangerously unreadable. But she didn't back down. For the first time she stood her ground. "I want out," she said. Ethan's entire body went still. "Then, is that really what you want?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Emily's chest ached, because she didn't know what she wanted anymore. But this pain, this constant feeling of never being enough, she couldn't live like this, so she straightened her spine and lied through her teeth. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Fine," he said, "then go." And just like that, it was over. Packing her bag shouldn't have been this hard. Emily stood in the middle of the walk-in closet, staring at the open suitcase on the bed. Her hands hovered over the neatly folded clothes, but she couldn't bring herself to move. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment she had wanted. Then why did it feel like she was ripping herself apart? She exhaled sharply, shaking off the hesitation. No, she had already made her choice. This marriage had always been a transaction, a temporary arrangement with an expiration date, and that expiration date was now. She had to leave, because if she didn't, she wasn't sure she ever would. Ethan came home late that night. Emily was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, gripping the edge of her suitcase. She heard the front door open. Then, footsteps approaching. Her heart pounded. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, like he had been running on nothing but caffeine and willpower for days. Like he knew. Emily swallowed hard. "You're home late." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "You're packing." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Emily nodded. "Yes." Silence. Then, "Are you sure?" Her breath caught. It was the first time he had ever asked her that, not in a cold, businesslike tone, not in a way that suggested he was calling her bluff, just asking. She hesitated. For the briefest moment, she almost changed her mind. Then she forced herself to nod. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "All right," he said. "I'll have someone take you to wherever you need to go." Emily's chest ached, because despite everything, despite knowing that this was the only way, a part of her had wanted him to, "Don't go." But Ethan Harrison wasn't that kind of man. And she had never been the kind of woman he would fight for. So instead, he walked away. And for the first time, Emily realized maybe he was letting her go because he thought she wanted him to. But wasn't that exactly what she had asked for? She woke up before sunrise. She hadn't slept much. Ethan's side of the bed had been empty when she had finally drifted off. Had he even come back? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to. By the time she zipped up her suitcase, the weight in her chest had settled into something cold and heavy. She told herself it was just nerves, that once she stepped out of this penthouse, the feeling would go away, that she would feel free. She was wrong. Emily reached the bottom of the staircase, her suitcase trailing behind her. She had expected to walk out without a word. But then, "Ethan is waiting for you outside." Emily turned. The voice belonged to Daniel, Ethan's assistant. She blinked. "He is?" Daniel nodded. "He wanted to make sure you got to your destination safely." Emily's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase, so he wasn't going to stop her, but he was still making sure she left safely. That shouldn't have meant anything. But somehow, it did. She forced herself to nod. "All right," she said quietly. Then she walked outside. Ethan was already waiting by the car, dressed in his usual tailored suit, expression unreadable. Emily swallowed hard. This was the last time she would see him like this. The last time she would feel this strange, suffocating tension between them. A driver stood nearby, waiting. Ethan glanced at her suitcase, then at her. "Do you have everything you need?" Emily nodded. "Yes." Silence. Then, Emily. Her heart stopped, because he had never said her name like that before, like it meant something, like she meant something. She gripped the strap of her purse tighter. "You should go inside," she said. "It's cold." Ethan didn't move. Neither did she. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, "Take care of yourself." Emily exhaled, "You too," and just like that, she got in the car and left. Nathan opened the door before she even knocked. "Took you long enough," he said. Emily let out a breathless laugh. It was the first real sound she had made all day. Nathan pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to safe. 1 week passed, then 2. Ethan never called, never texted, never showed up at her door, and somehow, that was worse than anything else, because it meant he had really let her go. And that shouldn't have hurt this much. Emily was sitting in a coffee shop, lost in thought, when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. "Hello?" A hesitant pause. Then, "Mrs. Harrison?" Emily stiffened. She hadn't heard that name in weeks. I'm sorry, but I don't go by that name anymore," she said, voice carefully neutral. The woman on the other end hesitated. "I understand," she said. "But it's about Ethan." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What about him?" The woman exhaled. "He's in the hospital." Emily's fingers tightened around her phone. "He's in the hospital." The words echoed in her mind, each syllable sinking deeper into her chest. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Hospital. Why? "What happened?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman on the other end hesitated. "Mr. Harrison collapsed at his office. He was found unconscious by his assistant. They rushed him here an hour ago." Emily's stomach dropped. Collapsed? Unconscious? Ethan wasn't the kind of man who got sick. Hell, she had never even seen him take a day off. Yet now, he was in a hospital bed somewhere in Manhattan. A sharp, suffocating panic wrapped around her ribs. "Which hospital?" she demanded. "New York Presbyterian." Emily was already grabbing her coat before she could think twice. "I'm on my way." The cab ride was a blur. All she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding against her ribcage. All she could see was the last time she had spoken to Ethan. "Do you have everything you need?" "Yes." "Take care of yourself." She had thought that was the end. She had thought they would never see each other again. But now she was about to walk into a hospital, not knowing what she was about to find. Her nails dug into her palms. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to see him like this, but she had no choice. Emily practically ran through the hospital corridors. She barely processed the receptionist's instructions, barely acknowledged the sterile smell of antiseptic and beeping monitors. Then, she saw Daniel. Ethan's assistant was standing outside a hospital room, his usual composure shattered. When he saw Emily, his eyes widened in shock. "Mrs. Emily," he corrected himself quickly. Emily didn't care about the formalities. "How is he?" she demanded. Daniel exhaled. "The doctors said it was exhaustion," he admitted. "Severe dehydration, stress overload. Daniel hesitated. Then, quieter, he hadn't been sleeping, barely eating. Emily felt like she had been punched in the gut. Not sleeping, not eating, was that because of her? She shook the thought away. That didn't matter now. Only one thing did. "Can I see him?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." The moment she stepped inside the hospital room, Emily stopped breathing. Ethan looked different. He was pale, the sharp edges of his usual perfection dulled. Dark circles clung under his closed eyes. His strong, invincible presence was replaced by something else entirely, something fragile. Emily's throat tightened, because for the first time, Ethan Harrison looked human. She took a shaky step closer, and then his eyes fluttered open. For a moment he didn't react. Then, "Emily?" His voice was hoarse, weak. Emily swallowed hard. "You're awake," she whispered. Ethan's gaze locked onto her, searching, unreadable. "You're here." Emily's chest ached. She nodded. "Yeah." Ethan exhaled, eyes slipping shut again. "You shouldn't be." Emily's heart stopped. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to push her away. Not after everything. And yet, here he was doing exactly that. She clenched her fists. "You passed out from exhaustion," she said, voice sharper than she intended. "Excuse me for caring." Ethan let out a dry chuckle. "You don't need to care, Emily," he murmured. "You're free now, remember?" Emily flinched. So this was how he was going to play it, like her being here was a mistake. Like he wasn't lying in a hospital bed because of what they had done to each other. Her jaw tightened. "If you didn't want me here," she shot back, "then why did your assistant call me?" Ethan didn't respond, but his grip on the blanket tightened slightly. Emily exhaled sharply. "You're impossible," she muttered. Ethan let out a soft chuckle. "You've mentioned that before." Emily rolled her eyes, but the sharp edge of her anger had faded. Because if Ethan was still bickering with her, it meant he was okay. It meant he was still Ethan. And for now, that was enough. She stayed. She wasn't sure why, but when the nurse came in, checking Ethan's IV, she found herself still sitting by his bedside. Still watching him, still wondering why she had ever thought she could walk away without looking back. Ethan turned his head toward her. "Why are you still here?" he asked, voice softer now. Emily swallowed. She didn't have an answer, or maybe she had too many. Finally, she settled on the only truth she could admit, "Because I wanted to be." Ethan's eyes softened. For the first time in weeks, neither of them spoke, because they didn't need to. Not tonight. The hospital room was eerily quiet when Emily woke up. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then, everything came rushing back. Ethan, the hospital, the way he had looked at her the night before. She turned her head slightly and froze. Ethan was already awake, his gaze locked onto her. He wasn't saying anything. He was just watching her. Emily's breath hitched. "Morning," she said, her voice hoarse from sleep. Ethan didn't look away. "Did you stay all night?" Emily shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah." A beat of silence. Then, "Why?" Her chest tightened. She could have lied. She could have said it was because of guilt, or because she wanted to make sure he was okay, but none of that was the real reason. So instead, she looked away. "I don't know." Ethan exhaled sharply. She swallowed. She didn't want to do this. Not now. Not when everything was still too raw. But then, Ethan's next words shattered every last defense she had left. "I never wanted you to leave." Emily's entire body went still. Slowly, she turned to face him. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and for the first time, he looked almost vulnerable, her fingers clenched around the edge of her coat. "You let me go," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because you asked me to." Emily's breath caught. Because he was right. She had asked for this. She had walked away. But if that was true, then why did it feel like she had been waiting for him to stop her? Ethan broke the silence first. "I never wanted this to be just a contract," he admitted. Emily's heart pounded. He looked away. At first, maybe, but somewhere along the way that changed. Emily's chest ached, because she knew exactly when it had changed for her too. But she had been too afraid to admit it, too afraid that if she let herself believe this was real, it would hurt more when it ended. And now she wasn't sure if she had saved herself from heartbreak or just made everything worse. She inhaled sharply. "So why didn't you say anything?" Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "You were already halfway out the door," he said. "Would it have made a difference?" Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out, because she didn't know. Would it have? Would she have stayed if he had asked her to? Would she have let herself believe in something more? She had no answer, and maybe that was the worst part of all. A nurse came in before either of them could say anything else. Ethan was discharged later that afternoon. Emily had planned to leave after that, to walk away like she should have from the beginning. But then, "Come home with me." Her breath caught. She turned. Ethan was watching her carefully, not demanding, not pressuring, just waiting. Emily swallowed hard. I'm not asking you to stay forever, he said, voice calm. Just for now. Emily's fingers tightened around her coat. This was dangerous, because if she said yes, she wasn't sure if she would ever have the strength to leave again. But when she looked at him, at the man she had once convinced herself she didn't love, she knew she was already too far gone. So she exhaled and whispered, "Okay." The penthouse hadn't changed. It was exactly as she had left it, but it felt different now. Maybe because she had left it behind once. Or maybe because she was realizing she had never really wanted to leave at all. She placed her suitcase by the bedroom door, hesitating. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching her. "This doesn't mean anything," she said quickly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't it?" Emily's stomach twisted. She wasn't ready for this, for what came next, so instead, she turned away. "I'll take the guest room," she murmured. She didn't wait for his response. She just walked away. Because the truth, she wasn't ready to face what they had both been running from. Not yet. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She should have felt relieved. She should have felt at peace, but all she felt was restless, because a part of her knew this wasn't over, not even close, and the longer she stayed, the more she realized maybe it never would be. Emily stood in front of the bedroom mirror, studying her reflection. She looked the same dark brown hair, same tired eyes, but something felt different. Maybe because she was back in this penthouse, back in the life she had sworn she left behind, or maybe because she knew she was walking straight into a disaster. She shouldn't have come back. She shouldn't have let Ethan convince her, but she had, and now she had to live with that choice. Ethan had ordered takeout. They sat across from each other at the long dining table, the silence thick, suffocating. It was different from before. Before, silence had been natural, expected. But now it was heavy with everything they weren't saying. Emily picked at her food, pushing rice around with her fork. Ethan cleared his throat. "You're not eating." Emily glanced up. "Neither are you." Ethan exhaled, setting his chopsticks down. "Emily, don't," she cut him off. "Let's just eat, okay?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. Not yet. After dinner, Emily escaped to the guest room. She couldn't be around him right now, not when she still hadn't figured out what the hell she was doing here. But an hour later, there was a knock on the door. She knew who it was before she even opened it. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, looking as exhausted as she felt. "You're avoiding me." Emily folded her arms. "I think we both need space." Ethan scoffed. "Then why did you come back?" She flinched. He had a point. "Maybe I shouldn't have," she admitted. Ethan's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You're lying," he said. Emily's breath hitched. "You don't know that." Ethan leaned in slightly. "Don't I?" She hated him, hated how easily he could read her, hated that he was right, because the truth, she had come back because she didn't know how to stay away. They were too close now. So close she could feel the heat of his body, so close she could smell the faint traces of his cologne. Emily swallowed. "This isn't a good idea," she whispered. Ethan tilted his head. "Then tell me to leave." Emily opened her mouth, but the words never came, because she couldn't. And Ethan knew it. His gaze dropped to her lips, her breath caught, and then he stepped back, just like that. Emily felt cold, as if he had taken something from her the moment he pulled away. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Good night, Emily." And then he walked away. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind wouldn't shut up. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to still want him, but she did. God, she did. And the worst part, she had a feeling he knew it too. The next morning, Emily found Ethan in the kitchen, making coffee. She hadn't planned to talk to him, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "What are we doing, Ethan?" Ethan stilled. Then he turned to face her. "That's up to you, Emily." Her heart pounded. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. Ethan nodded slowly. "But do you want to?" Emily swallowed. Did she? Because if she said yes, there would be no turning back. Ethan took a slow step forward. "Just be honest with me," he said softly. Emily's chest ached. She had spent so long running from this. From him. But maybe it was time to stop, so she took a deep breath and whispered, "Yes." Yes. The word hung between them, heavy, raw, undeniable. For the first time, Emily stopped running. For the first time, she admitted the truth. Ethan's gaze darkened, searching her face for hesitation. There was none. His jaw tightened. Say it again. Emily's breath hitched. She wasn't sure if it was a demand or a plea, but either way, she gave him what he wanted. Yes. And just like that, everything changed. Ethan moved first, one step, then another, until they were close enough for her heart to trip over itself. Emily's pulse pounded. Every part of her screamed to pull back, to protect herself. But she didn't, because for the first time, she didn't want to. Ethan lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered. Tell me you're sure. Emily swallowed hard. Her entire body was shaking, but not from fear. Not this time. I'm sure. Ethan exhaled sharply, like he had been waiting a lifetime to hear those words. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was everything unsaid, everything denied, everything they had been too afraid to admit. Emily sank into him, clutching his shirt as if he was the only thing keeping her grounded. And maybe he was. Ethan cupped her face, deepening the kiss, pouring months of frustration, longing, and something dangerously close to love into it. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But God, it was a start. They didn't stop until they were breathless, until reality came crashing down. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. His hands were still on her, like he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. Emily's chest ached, because she knew that feeling too well. She had felt it the moment she walked away. She had felt it every day since. Ethan closed his eyes. Are you going to leave again? He asked quietly. Emily's stomach twisted, because she had asked herself the same thing. Could she stay this time? Could she let herself have this? But when she looked at him, at the man who had somehow become everything, she knew. She already had her answer. No. Ethan's eyes snapped open. His grip on her waist tightened. You mean that? Emily inhaled sharply. Yes. Ethan exhaled, his entire body relaxing, and for the first time in forever, everything felt right. The next morning, Ethan didn't let her go. Not when she woke up wrapped in his arms. Not when she tried to get out of bed. Not when she murmured something about needing coffee. You're not leaving this bed. Emily laughed. Are you going to hold me hostage, Mr. Harrison? Ethan smirked. If that's what it takes. Emily rolled her eyes, but her heart felt too full. They were doing this. No more contracts. No more pretending. Just them. And for once, that was enough. Ethan's expression softened. Marry me again. Emily's breath caught. This time, there was no contract, no conditions, no business deal. Just him and her. Emily swallowed hard. Ask me properly, Ethan chuckled. Then he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Emily Carter, will you marry me? And this time, she didn't hesitate. Yes.